Okay, so today we're going to look at Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy. We're going to look at the first chapter. This is a really important work, and for the A level, it's absolutely essential. I mean, you really should get hold of this book and read it through. You do not need to read the objections and replies, but you certainly should read the first 6 chapters. It's only about 60 pages long. And what's surprising about it is it completely revolutionised philosophy in a really short book. It's called First Philosophy because it deals with absolutely fundamental things. And First Philosophy is an ancient world kind of title from Aristotle about most fundamental questions in existence. Now, if you remember, Descartes' a rationalist. He thinks you can learn about the existence of things outside the mind through reason alone. But it's really important to remember that, in a sense, this book is an attempt to prove that that's true, and it's an attempt to justify that conclusion, right? So one of the subtitles of the text is that he proves the existence of the soul, he proves the existence of the world, he proves the existence of God. So there you have a kind of good example, if you want to give an example, of rationalism and what Descartes thinks he's proved of it. To understand this chapter, one way of breaking it down is to think there's 3 waves of doubt that kind of overcome Descartes and push him down this kind of, if you like, a current, pushes him from one place to another. At the end of the meditation, he actually says, I feel like it's the beginning of meditation too, actually says, I feel like I'm whirling around in a deep, dark whirlpool and my feet can't touch the ground and my head can't go above the water, right? So these 3 waves of doubt are very important. They help you kind of get a grip on the chapter. The first doubt is basically illusion, and it's the claim that we can't trust our sense experiences, we can't trust our eyes, our ears, and so on and so forth. Wave 2 is the dream hypothesis, and this is the claim, effectively, you can't trust that there's an external world out there, because you could be dreaming. And finally, there's the problem of possible deception. If that's the case, we can't even trust our reason. And of course, that's a huge problem. If we can't trust our reason, then rationalism's out the window. If we can't trust our senses, empiricism's out the window, we'll have a major issue. So what's the historical context of Descartes' Meditations? Well, really, just before Descartes wrote the Meditations, or I say that, a few decades before, there had been a revolution in our understanding of the solar system and our place in it. Copernicus, a long time before, had kind of worked out that the Earth goes around the sun rather than the sun going around the Earth, and Galileo had gone further with that, showing the motion of the planets and that they were not flat discs, but that they were round. So what had happened was there was a huge change, right? So initially there was the geocentric understanding of the world. We were in the middle of it, and the sun was going around the Earth, and the planets were going around the Earth, and we were the centre of the world. And then after Copernicus and Galileo, it became obvious that we were going around the sun. It's really important to understand this is a huge effect on people at the time, massive effect. You effectively, the place that we are in the world has been challenged. We're not the centre of it anymore. And all the things we believed and held to be true about ourselves and our place in the universe were found no longer to be true. This is a huge thing, and I think it's probably enabled Descartes to then start asking some really serious questions about whether Aristotle's physics could be trusted. And in fact, he realised it couldn't be. And part of the Meditations, at least some people argue, is really just a way of getting you to think in a new way in terms of physics. Descartes understood knowledge to be a kind of edifice, a structure. The top of the structure has certain sciences in it, maybe history, psychology, or so on and so forth. And then further down the structure, you get more and more fundamental sciences. And at the bottom of the structure, you have things like philosophy, geometry, mathematics. Now, the important thing about this structure is if you shake the foundations of it, then you have to kind of change the structure. And that's what Descartes not only thought was trying to do himself, but thought needed to be done. Right, so the reason, of course, was, as I've just said, that change, that paradigm shift, that Descartes then thought, well, we have to now seek new foundations for knowledge, new foundations for science. So I want to look at the first meditation. I want to look at it in detail. It's just absolutely so key and so important. It will be good for you to have gone through it with me, maybe not the whole thing completely, but certainly enough, and then we can talk through, or I can talk through what matters here. So the first meditation, what can be called into doubt? When you see those blue arrows, it means start reading from there. Okay. So some years ago, says Descartes, I was struck by the large number of falsehoods that I had accepted as true in my childhood, and by the highly doubtful nature of the whole edifice that I had subsequently based on them. I realised that it was necessary once in the course of my life to demolish everything completely and start again right from the foundation if I wanted to establish anything at all in the sciences that was stable and likely to last. But the task looked an enormous one, and I began to wait until I should reach a mature enough age to ensure that no subsequent time of life would be more suitable for tackling such inquiries. This led me to put the project off for so long that I would now be to blame if by pondering over it any further I wasted the time still left for carrying it out. So today I've expressly rid my mind of all worries and arranged for myself a clear stretch of free time. I'm here quite alone, and at last I'll devote myself sincerely and without reservation to the general demolition of my opinions. So the first wave of doubt, as I said, is about illusion. It's basically a claim that you can't fully trust your sense experience, because your sense experience comes through your senses. Your senses themselves can deceive you. And we know about this from the philosophy of perception, which we studied earlier. You can have an illusion or delusion of an oasis in the desert which doesn't exist. Your senses represent to you as if there's an oasis and there isn't one. And you can even have more severe deceptions such as hallucinations, right? When there's nothing even there at all. So first thing we have to understand is we cannot fully trust our senses. And as far as Descartes is concerned, if we can't fully trust something, we have to suspend judgment on it. Okay, so if you cast your eye down to that blue arrow on the left, we'll start reading from there. Whatever I've up till now accepted as most true, I have acquired either from senses or through the senses. But from time to time I've found that the senses deceive, and it's prudent never to trust completely those who have deceived us even once. We can think of our senses as instruments that give us knowledge or information. Just as a fuel gauge in a car will give you information about how much fuel there is in the tank, in this instance it looks like it's full, our senses give us information about things going on beyond them. And a key thing about the instruments, our senses, is that they don't tell you when they're not working, right? When they are working, they're great. But even when they're working, they don't tell you that they're working properly. So the thing about the senses is, even if they're working well, you don't know that they're working well. Right? So they're not giving you the information about their reliability. They are just reliable. Right? You don't know that they're reliable unless you're lucky, right? So that's the problem with sense experience. You can't trust it. And then Descartes considers that he could be having a dream, right? This is wave 2. I cannot know there is an external world or that my body is in it if I'm dreaming, right? So not only do my senses sometimes give me wrong information, but sometimes I'm dreaming. And so it's plausible, I suppose, that I could be dreaming now. And so Descartes initially thinks, well, is this really plausible? Well, would God allow Descartes to be deceived in this way? Well, Descartes says God does allow him to be deceived occasionally anyway, in terms of his senses and in terms of his dreams. So if God allows it sometimes, presumably it's possible it happens quite often. If not all the time. The other thing to remember is Descartes says, well, look, and even we could say there isn't a God, maybe that will help. No, it won't. Because as far as Descartes is concerned, using a kind of Platonic idea, if we come from something less perfect than God, if we're the result of chemical, biological laws of nature, which are contingent and imperfect and random, and we're kind of the result of this evolutionary process, then, hey, we even more reason to think we could be in massive error. If we do come from God and he's omnibenevolent and omniscient and omnipotent, he probably would at least guarantee that we're not completely deceived. But if we don't, then we have less reason to think that. To that arrow where it says 1, it says, and then he asks the question, how could it be denied that these hands or this whole body are mine, right? So I'm sitting here by the fire. Can it really be denied that this body, that these hands are mine, that I'm not sitting by the fire? He says, unless perhaps I were to liken myself to a madman whose brains are so damaged by persistent vapours of melancholia that they firmly maintain they are kings when they are paupers, or say they are dressed in purple when they're naked, or that their heads are made of earthenware, or that they are pumpkins or made of glass. So he says, well, am I going crazy? Only crazy people think something like that. So let's go to 2, that blue arrow there, and go see what Descartes says to that. Well, he says, look, a brilliant piece of reasoning. As if I were not a man who sleeps at night and regularly has all the same experiences while asleep as madmen do when awake, indeed sometimes even more improbable ones. How often asleep at night am I convinced of just such familiar events that I am here in my dressing gown, sitting by the fire, when in fact I am lying undressed in bed. Yet at the moment my eyes are certainly wide awake when I look at this piece of paper. I shake my head, and it's not sleep. I stretch out and feel my hand. I do so deliberately, and I know that what I'm doing. All this would not happen with such distinctness to someone asleep. Indeed. But as if I did not remember other occasions when I have been tricked by exactly similar thoughts while asleep. As I think about this more carefully, I see plainly that there are never any sure signs by means of which being awake can be distinguished from being asleep. The result is that I begin to feel dazed, and this very feeling only reinforces the notion that I may be asleep. So apparently Descartes suffered very, very vivid dreams. This is written about in a couple of books about him, and the key thing to understand here, Descartes saying, look, it only needs to be the case that for a moment that it feels like I'm not dreaming and I am dreaming, right? Even a moment where it's plausible that it could be a dream is enough to undermine the whole experience, right? So even though dreams have dreamlike quality to them, if I think now, am I dreaming? It is plausible that I am, because I often think, am I dreaming in a dream? And think, no, I'm not. Right? And if you have vivid enough dreams, that does make sense. And so then Descartes asks about his knowledge of mathematics and geometry. He says, well, maybe I don't exist, or my body doesn't exist, and the external world doesn't exist, but I have ideas, and I have knowledge about ideas. I have this kind of knowledge that's available to me. I know that all triangles have 3 sides and they're 180 degrees on the inside. I know that all circles are 360 degrees. That 2 plus 2 equals 4. Now, this is knowledge about abstract entities, and given that they don't exist in the kind of external world in any sense, I should have knowledge of that. That hasn't been damaged by my understanding of possibility of sense deception, right? That shouldn't have damaged that knowledge. So can I trust that? Is that the kind of thing I can do? Can I have those fundamental sciences still available to me? And the answer, and this is where Descartes writes it. So it's a reasonable conclusion from this might be that physics, astronomy and medicine and all other disciplines which depend on the study of composite things are doubtful, right? Those are the sciences that we know depend on knowledge of the external world, while arithmetic, geometry and other subjects of this kind, which deal only with the simplest and most general things, regardless of whether they really exist in nature or not, contain something certain and undoubtable. For whether I'm awake or asleep, 2 and 3 add together to make 5, and a square has no more than 4 sides. It seems impossible that such transparent truths should incur any suspicion of being false. Seems reasonable enough, right? So we now come to the final wave of doubt, the evil demon thought experiment. And today this makes its modern appearance as a brain in a vat thought experiment. Descartes obviously didn't have a mad scientist of computers available to him to come up with this. But the idea is that there's an evil demon that's able to deceive him completely and utterly in his brain and his mind. Right? Let's look at that. I will suppose, therefore, that not God, who is supremely good and the source of truth, but rather some malicious demon of the utmost power and cunning, has employed all his energies in order to deceive me. I shall think that the sky, the air, the earth, colours, shapes, sounds, and all external things are merely the delusion of dreams, which he has devised to ensnare my judgment. I shall consider myself as not having hands or eyes or flesh or blood or senses, but as falsely believing that I have all these things. I shall stubbornly and firmly persist in this meditation, and even if it's not in my power to know any truth, I shall at least do what is in my power, that is resolutely guard against assenting to any falsehood, so that the deceiver, however powerful and cunning he may be, will be unable to impose on me in the slightest degree. But this is an arduous undertaking, and a kind of laziness brings me back to normal life. I'm like a prisoner who is enjoying an imaginary freedom while asleep as he begins to suspect that he is asleep. He dreads being woken up, and he goes along with the pleasant illusion as long as he can. In the same way, I happily slide back into my old opinions and dread being shaken out of them for fear that my peaceful sleep may be followed by hard labour when I awake, and that I shall have to toil not in the light, but amid the inextricable darkness of the problem I have now raised. This is the very bottom of the path, right? If there's an evil demon deceiving you, then you can't even trust your knowledge of mathematics, of logic. You can't trust any of that, because we're perfectly able to be deceived about those things as well. We make mistakes all the time in our thoughts and thinking, even about mathematical propositions. And there's no logical inconsistency with us thinking that 2 + 2 is 4, because an evil demon has got us to think that. It seems hard to get our head around, but logically speaking, it is possible. And so we come, therefore, as Descartes did, to the end of the first chapter, and you see that he has fallen down effectively a serious philosophical rabbit hole. See you next time.